Welcome back to This Week in Bevy. This week 0.14.1 is out. Bevy Jam 5 voting is ongoing for another week, and there's plenty of submissions to showcase this week. If you're interested, if your fix got into 0.14.1, you can go check out the milestone, which has 39 closed issues and PRs. And we'll talk about tracked change detection in a minute, which is probably my favorite merged feature this week, alongside some new quality of life APIs, a fantastic new example for mid-level rendering APIs. And I'm a huge fan of new rendering examples because even when Bevy's rendering changes, the examples are always kept up to date as a solid resource. We will see a bunch of Jam submissions this week in the showcase. We'll mention them in the issue if the authors chose to showcase their work, but we won't be covering the games in depth until after voting has closed. In 14.034, there's an incredible new change that makes it possible to know what changed your component or resource values. This is a new changed by function on components and resources that's behind a new track change detection feature flag. The change detection example can now be run with the feature enabled, resulting in more informative output as you can see here. This information also shows up when you're using a debugger, and the actual API usage here for the new changed by function is very similar to is changed or is added if you've used those before. Overall, this is a really fantastic change, and I'm really happy to see more debugging tools. And we mentioned some quality of life updates. Early in July, 14.044 added support for two new resources, accumulated mouse motion and accumulated mouse scroll. And this week in 14.488, these resources were used in more examples. So definitely go check this out if you want to replace some of your mouse motion event usage. And as of 13.859, the scene instance ready event is now an observer event. This means that when you spawn a scene, the event will be triggered either globally or on the parent of the scene if one exists. 14.370 adds a new example showing off how to use specialized mesh pipelines, which is a mid-level rendering API. The actual example shows three entities, which are triangles, rendered in a triangle pattern. The example spawns these three entities with a custom triangle list mesh, including vertex colors, and serves as an introduction for some Bevy-specific abstractions for draw commands and pipelines. This example also starts to expose some WGPU concepts as well, although many types in the example are still Bevy render specific, such as fragment state, which is a Bevy specialized version of WGPU's fragment state. Overall, this is a really great example for anybody looking to move beyond the basic material and as-bind group usage without getting into full raw WGPU. Moving on from rendering to more quality of life changes, 14.594 introduces a new quality of life API in with child on the build children trait. This improves the workflow for spawning a bundle as a child, which contrasts against the already existing add child that accepts an entity as an argument. And there are a whole bunch of camera-related functions for converting between world space, viewport, and NDC, or normalized device coordinates. 14.590 adds two more in depth NDC to view Z and world to viewport with depth, which enables working with depth values. And of course, Atlas's merge train is a maintainer level view into active PRs, both those that are merging and those that need work. Last week, there were 14 PRs covered in the merge train. And with that, we find ourselves in the showcases. Once again, we are not going to go deep into the showcases for the Bevy Game Jam entries, as many of them are still under voting, but we will still point out the ones that were shared by their authors. First off, we've got Ducky Boyd's. Ducky Boyd's was inspired by implementing the Boyd's algorithm in Bevy and figured out a way to how to make a game fitting the theme out of it. Grow your duck population and avoid them being feasted on. Next up, we've got Physics Down, Nav Mesh Up, going down through a board of pegs with gravity thanks to Avian 2D's physics, and going back up through a nav mesh from the same colliders using Blue Navigator. Recycle Roomba is a physics sandbox simulator where you design the robot Roomba for delivering containers to the recycler. It was built using Rapier and a parametric modeling plugin called Bevy Parametra. And we saw this last week, but this is a straight skeleton implementation that now works with concave polygons. The implementation for this one isn't planned to be open sourced at the moment, so sorry for those that are looking forward to seeing this. And Cyberspace is another Bevy Game Jam 5 entry. As part of that entry, a tutorial video was created to help people get into the game, and that's what you're seeing here. The tutorial video is available on YouTube, which has links to the game itself. Crazy Bike is a hectic first-person game about delivering stuff on your bike in time, where physics abuse is very encouraged. While Burr is a high-score game where you try to make an electric motor spin as fast as possible. Next up, we've got a Hex Grid War game, which is a hexagonal grid war chess game featuring crates like Hex, Bevy Tweening, Bevy RTS Camera, Bevy Outline, and more. Our next showcase is not a Bevy Game Jam entry. It is a first pass at environment interactions and player inventory, with an abstract container system where other items like chess can also have inventories. And this demo shows off a work-in-progress dialogue system. The end-user API is made up of observers and one-shot systems. Up next, we've got a work-in-progress binary greedy meshing implementation that just reached a working state. In the current state, it's just in the positive X direction right now, but the other directions are just shifting some signs around, so it shouldn't be too long before it works in all directions. And this runtime editable terrain tooling using noise and modifiable entities got a couple of updates this week. The tools look pretty fun to play with, so definitely go check this out if this is your thing. Next up, we're back into the Bevy Game Jam entries with Simon Says, which is a cosmic horror themed puzzle game with 25 unique levels and 48 additional challenges. Headphones are strongly recommended for this one for the audio experience, and the source is available on GitHub. Blobo Party is a casual musical roguelike deck builder. Dance, upgrade, and dance some more as you pass through each of the levels. Surviving Today is a semi-survivors-like without the meta progression, with 5 days, 5 minutes each. Whale Song is a peaceful, meditative swimming simulator that follows a humpback whale on its annual migration cycle from the warm northern waters off Australia down to the frigid Antarctic. There is no ending to this game and you can't die. Instead, just sit back, relax, and swim. By contrast, Live Die Repeat is anything but relaxing. Self-described as Zelda meets Groundhog Day in a creepy, cute dungeon, Live Die Repeat is a 2D stealth action game, where each life lasts only 1 minute. You have no weapons, and each time you die, time loops and you start over again in the same place. Again, and again, and again. And in our next game, the world has ended, and it will again. That is, unless you can finish your art project. This game is a walking simulator and a path through time. Cycles IO is a multiplayer IO game where you have to make closed cycles around other players to kill them. Uses Lightyear for the networking with client-side prediction, interpolation, and delta compression to replicate only the latest diffs instead of the entire trail or zone. And then comes Garbage Collector. Collect garbage and destroy enemies, alone or with friends in local co-op. The source for this one is available on GitHub, as is true with many of the Jam entries. Next up, we bounce out of Jam entries for a second to view a utility debugger, which is using gizmos to visualize and debug AI. This is the game version of AI debugging, not the magical fairy dust version. And The Girl Who Climbed the Tower is a level-based game with roguelike elements. The source for this one is available on GitHub. And then, of course, there's Hamster Cycle Zero. In Hamster Cycle Zero, you play as a hamster in a wheel in a world of 2D platforming. Collect blueberries and hamster collectibles as you race to the finish. Meanwhile, Soul is an intentionally disoriented game jam submission that contains fast-moving colors in which you try to jump from platform to platform before Soul grows and envelops you. And finally for today, we've got a Bullet Heaven, which exists on a 360-degree planet and was put together in only 2.5 days. The source code for this one is also available on GitHub, so if you want to see how they made this 360-degree planet, go check it out. And that brings us into the crate releases. First off, we've got the 0.2 release of Bevy Lit, which is a 2D lighting crate. The 0.2's flagship feature is WebGL compatibility. The demos of the functionality look a little bit like this. Next up, we've got Bevy Mod Mipmap Generator. Bevy Mod Mipmap Generator now has optional runtime BCN texture compression and an optional disk cache for caching the compressed texture. This isn't a replacement for using proper compressed asset formats like KTX2, and isn't really meant to be used in a final game or app. The new feature is just to make using compressed and mipmapped textures easier during testing and development. If you're not familiar with mipmaps, using mipmaps and compressed textures can have significant impact on performance, memory usage, and appearance. Here's an example of a rendering of a helmet without the mipmaps, and here, hopefully with the video compression that this will go through, you will see that this is a much smoother variation of a rendering. And that brings us to the first release of OpenChecks. OpenChecks 0.1 is the first release of a checks framework that allows writing validation for things like assets. In the future, it will also enable artists to understand why an asset is failing through a UI. And TinyBale 0.1.1 is out. bail on failure with 4 macro variants, or return quiet, or continue and or continue quiet, for returning and continuing, and logging or doing it quietly. This is a macroized version of a pattern that has emerged in the Bevy community for avoiding panics and warning instead. And finally, we've got Bevy Fmod. Bevy Fmod is a wrapper for libfmod. Fmod is a cross-platform audio engine that is used in many games. It is a commercial product with a free license available for specific terms, and 0.5 of Bevy Fmod brings support for dynamic Fmod plugins. And that's it for this week. As always, we have the full list of PRs that got merged, issues that were opened, and PRs that were open this week. So if you're looking to get involved, review is always a great place to start. And with that, I'll see you next week. Next week, we will have a regular This Week in Bevy because voting doesn't end until the next week's issue will go out for the Bevy Game Jam 5, but we will be putting out a Bevy Game Jam 5 video after voting closes. So have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next one.